Yeah, the first time I went into a police cell, I think I was 10 years of age. Yeah, 10 years of age was the first time I was locked out of a police cell. And I had no fear of the authorities. It was just a game. Yeah, it was just like a game of cat and mouse. What happens is when people first go to the prison, they fear the walls. Then what happens is they then get used to the walls. And then eventually they end up depending on the walls. And that is exactly the process. I really believe that it's not systems that change people as individuals that work within it. So prison's primary purpose should be about therapy, education, rehabilitation, and support to help people change and live better kind of lives. At the moment, we're failing in that.
This is a podcast. Can I ask for two massive favors from you guys? The first one being, if you're listening to the podcast, make sure to click that subscribe button. The more listeners, the bigger guests I can get on the podcast to kind of share their stories and break the stigma. And the second favor being, if you're watching this on YouTube, over 89% of you guys have not clicked that subscribe button. So if you are enjoying the podcast, make sure to click that subscribe button. Honestly, it means the world to me, and honestly, I appreciate all your support. Let's jump back into the podcast. Gethin, absolutely incredible to have you on the podcast. I mean, your upbringing been so challenging, what you've been through, and you could say traumatic kind of past. For the listeners, if they've not come across your story of obviously with being in the criminal justice system as well and kind of the incredible work you're doing now, could you do an introduction to yourself?
Yes, my name's Gethin Jones. I've got a company called Unlocking Potential. I mainly work within prisons, charities and local authorities. I do that in the UK. I also do that in America and also Australia. But the main aim of everything that I do is about breaking down the them enough narrative, because I truly believe that it's not systems that change people as individuals that work within it. And I do that through sort of like staff training, but also creating personal responsibility programs to people that are trapped within the system. So that's a bit of me in a nutshell, but I'm sure I'll say more about it later.
And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about that upbringing, for yourself. Do you think a lot of it stems from that environmental of where you brought up to where people get to in life, that kind of the environment they're brought up in?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a thing about nature, nurture. There's always been that debate, but I do believe nurture is a big thing, and the nurture comes from the environments that you're within. And I think the environments can dictate who you end up becoming at certain times in your life. So I remember a bloke once saying to me, he said this little rhyme, I use it all the time when I work in prisons. It says, what you see, you learn. What you learn, you practice. What you practice, you become. But what you become isn't always what you're meant to be. And that kind of sums up what my beginning of my journey was like. And then it was a process of trying to find out who am I really.
I mean, if we go back some early years, I mean, where were you brought up, like?
So I was brought up in the best city in the world, Portsmouth. But yes, got a great football team in the world as well. I will say that. Not many people agree with me, but
I can't say I know how well they're doing, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. We're top of the league at the moment. I won't say what league, but we are top of the league. But there we go. But yeah, so I was born in Portsmouth. So that was the city that I was brought up within. The city at that time was a naval city. It was quite a hard, tough city, and I was born into like what many would call like a dysfunctional family. What I mean by that was my mum had come through the care system, so she was in children's homes. My mum also had some learning difficulties, and my father was an alcoholic. So from a very young age, I weren't able to get the love, care, and nurture that I needed to develop as a human being. Social services were there from the day I was born. I will say you can probably find the first 35 years of my life in a filing cabinet somewhere. So experiences, it was a tough place to grow up, Portsmouth anyway, but all areas were tough in like the 70s and early 80s. So, but that's the city I grew up within.
You mentioned your dad there being alcoholic. Was your dad around much? Because I know you've kind of spoke about your mum being there for yourself and your siblings, but was your dad around at any point in your early years?
No, so that's a whole story in itself. Like you can go down rabbit warrens.
Yeah,
my story. So my mum had to flee my father when I was about 2 years of age, and that was the first time me and my brother and my younger sister were removed and put into care. So my mum sort of got up one day and said she was going to the shop, and then she just never returned. And then we were put into a foster placement, and then we was then returned to me mum. I didn't see my father again at all then, really. But then I did have one encounter with him, and that was when I was 17 years of age, and I was in a prison called Portland. I wasn't too far off of my 18th birthday, and I was also due some compensation because I'd had a bus accident when I was a kid as well. And then all of a sudden, I had a random visit, and the random visit was my dad. And I'm like, yeah. So the first time I met him, I was in a prison. Turned out my sister had found him. She had kind of let slip that I've got this compensation coming. Yeah. All of a sudden, he turns up at the prison and offering me these opportunities to go and live with him in Wales. Hence why I've got the Welsh name. But to be honest with you, it's too little, too late, and I didn't take him up on his offer. And then a few years later, when I was about 26, I found out that he died of cirrhosis of the liver. But I had no interaction or impact with the man, so like, I had no real feelings when he passed because he birthed me, if you want to kind of call it that. You know what I mean? He impregnated my mother, but that was about it.
Yeah, I mean, what was that conversation? Was he sorry? Was he apologetic when you had that conversation in the prison?
To be honest, I can't really. I think I was like a little bit gobsmacked because it's like, who is this bloke? And I was a little bit kind of curious, and he had his partner there as well. It sounds terrible, but I remember like she just had quite like a bushy chin, and I was just
concentrating on that, yeah.
And but yeah, I just like and I think if I'm honest with you, when he was talking about, because he was talking about all these different family that we had in Wales, and I think the thing that I had really was that it was attractive. Yeah, because it was something I'd never had being in children's homes and everything like that. But I just had this thing of just like thinking, who are you? I'm not going to like just leave here and go to you. So so
it must have been hard on your mum. I had a guy on the podcast the other day called Julian, and his mum was in a relationship with his dad, and he was domestic, but it was really hard for the mum because financially she was like dependent on him. And then to get out of it, they end up becoming homeless, and there was like couch surfing for a while. So it must have been really hard for your mum, obviously, to kind of go solo. And do you have 3 brothers as well? Yourself and 3 brothers?
No, so I had 1 brother and 2 sisters, but there's 3 there's 3 children in total. Yes, my mum became a single parent of 4 children. But she did have relationships. So my younger sister Sadie, her father sadly died in a road traffic accident, and that meant my mum also had a nervous breakdown, and she went into that was where we was then put into another foster placement, and that was probably when I was around about 5 years of age. But when we came out of that foster place, my mum was quite vulnerable as well, so she didn't always pick the best of relationships. And then there was another bloke called Richard that came into the house, and he was like, he was just a criminal, really, so he used to steal ring cars and stuff like that. He was also quite a violent man, quite controlling to my mother. So she didn't do too well down. I think people preyed as well on her vulnerability in relation to her learning difficulties. And then after that, when, I wasn't home then, I was in children's homes full time, but she had another partner called Dean, and he was quite controlling as well, and convinced her to move away from Portsmouth and go up to Norfolk, Kings Lynn, and she ended up becoming quite isolated and alone up there as well. But the same sort of thing as what she did with my father, she fled, came back to Portsmouth. So yeah, it wasn't an easy run for me, mum. But in truth, because I was so damaged myself as a child when I was growing up, I had my own anger and resentment to me mum. So I didn't actually start to develop a relationship with my mum until I was in my late 30s. So it was quite a journey, really.
Not really having that kind of nurture when you was younger. I mean, imagine it must have been quite difficult, obviously, being in and out of care homes. You must have felt quite unsettled. Was that right, would you say?
Yeah. So it was like, so the only person I really found that I was connected to was my brother. Me and my brother were like thick as thieves, like literally. Yeah. And we did everything together. We played together. We ran away together. We stole together. It was just kids being kids. And we were quite unruly in the neighbourhood, but that was because we had no real kind of clear direction. But when Richard also as well, he used to beat on me and my brother as well, and he ended up going to prison when I was probably about 7 or 8 years of age, and my brother was a little bit older. And when he went to prison, my brother, because he's a little bit older and a little bit more angry, he started to beat on my mum. Yeah, so my brother then started to be violent towards my mother. And then one day I came home and he was gone. Yeah, and they put him in children's homes. And I remember on that day I lost the most important person in my life. And I literally started to ask social services to put me into care because I just wanted to be back with my brother. Yeah, I didn't want to be in this home. I didn't feel like I was connected in the home. I had no real feeling or emotion to my mum. I was clearly separated from my sister. So I was just kind of this like young 9-year-old, 10-year-old boy that was just completely lost and alone. I ended up kind of getting my wish, and it was funny actually because it was the courts that ended up doing it. So I got my first criminal conviction when I was 12, and I remember going into the courtroom and asking the judge to put me into care. The first time they didn't listen to me and they didn't ask the question why. Instead, they gave me a 6-month conditional discharge. But I remember walking out of court and saying to my social worker, I am going to keep getting in trouble until you put me into care. Yeah. And that's what I did. And a few months later, I got given what was called a full care order. I always think about the worst care order. I remember the order, but I don't remember that much of the care. And then the other thing was as well, because of I was very unsettled, my brother was very settled, they also didn't reunite me with my brother. So then what happened was I had another big issue in my head because I found myself in children's homes. I didn't want to be there because I wanted with my brother, but I also didn't want to be at home. So I was just kind of lost.
I mean, yeah, imagine being like in and out. I mean, that kind of first kind of conviction when you was 11. I mean, was you scared at the time, or was it did it just all feel normal to you? You know, obviously with having such a traumatic kind of upbringing.
Yeah, it was normal actually because I was doing some talks last week to architects actually that build prisons and police stations and everything like that as well. And the first time I went into a police cell, I think I was 10 years of age. Yeah, 10 years of age was the first time I was locked out of a police cell, and I had no fear of the authorities. It was just a game. Yeah, it was just like a game of cat and mouse, you know. Yeah. And I think also as well, it's probably any attention was better than no attention. Yeah, you know. Yeah. So being in the police station didn't bother me. And I remember going to court for the first time, and back in them days, because I was so young, you can't even sit in the dock. You used to have to sit in the front in these seats. But I remember having no fear of where it was that I was. This was just my world. It's just. Yeah. It was a part of it, The funny thing is, as I got older as well, you used to go to the magistrate's court. It was like a social event. Yeah, you see all your mates and all the different people that were all there. It was just, that was that thing. What you see, you learn. What you learn, you practice. What you practice, you become. That would just became my world.
I was going to say, with the kids, obviously, similar ages, when there's obviously mingling with kids who also got convictions. I mean, did they all come from quite traumatic kind of upbringings as well, or was it all just kind of just getting themselves in trouble at a young age? Right?
It was a bit of a mixture, really. So I ended up kind of. I'll give you a bit of an idea. So when they separated me from my brother, there's a thing which is called like attracts like. Yeah. And I met a new friend, and he became my best friend. And his name was Michael Sullivan. And with Mike, when he was around about 8-9 years of age, his mum sadly died of cancer. So they went to his father and said, like, you need to take responsibility and custody for your child. And his father refused. Not only did he refuse, but he left the country and went and lived in Canada. And then that meant that Mike then ended up finding himself in the system. He truly didn't want to be with him, but he had nowhere else to go. And that was exactly the same as with me, and there were lots of other kind of young people within there, and there was always something sitting behind it. It might be parents were alcoholic, there was violence within there was criminality going on. We were just products of our environment. Yeah. And then what happened was then because we were what was classed as beyond parental control, which means that the parent doesn't have the skills or ability to control that child, you then kind of get put into the care of the local authority, care in loose bracket. Yeah. And then what they do is they just mix you all together, and it's like, I wonder what's going to happen there.
Yeah. Go more kind of like, mischief. I mean, was there anyone during that care home which tried putting you on the right path, but didn't quite? Was there anyone like during that time where they could see where you was going and try and intervene to try to put you on that right path in life?
Yeah. And so for me, I I was destined to be where I was going to be. So if I
Yeah.
can't, some people have said what could have made a difference. And for me, when I was 2 years of age and I was first taken into foster care when my mum left, the truth of the matter is I should have been adopted at that age. Yeah, if I look at it now, that would have been the get out. Maybe the second time when I was 5, that could have maybe have worked as well. By the time I got there, I was already on the path and nothing was going to stop me.
Yeah.
But what it was I do remember some kindness, do you know what I mean? So I had a social worker called Nick Bishop. He used to make me laugh, because I used to run away and I'd be sleeping rough in towns and cities across the south of England. And years ago in the 80s, if people went to places like Marwell Zoo or Longleat, they'd have little stickers saying, I've been to Marwell Zoo, I've been to Longleat.
Yeah.
And he was going, I'm going to get stickers and say I've been to Basingstoke Police Station, Southampton Police Station, Chichester Police Station, Littlehampton Police Station. But he was just always kind of like, a bit like that thing. He giggled and, tried to help me, but just did it in like a non-authoritative kind of way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I always remember just good experiences with him. And then there was other staff we used to as well. That's called the staff in some of the children's homes, Auntie and Uncle. And there's a staff member called Uncle Stu. And I still see Uncle Stu today and we go and have breakfast, And then there was another staff member called Ian Walker. He married a lady called Rona Fitzsimmons. And I still have relationships with these today. So there were people within it, but I was literally at a point where I was so damaged that I was just going to go where I was going to go.
Yeah. I had a guest on called Mickey Dax and he went to prison. He spoke about like there's a bit of like a cut-off point where you need to get in early because as soon as they're in the teenage, like 13, 14, like they're already on that path. Do you agree there's a bit of a cut-off there? Like they need to get in young to kind of change that path before it's too late?
Yes. Within my professional career, I managed a project called PYOP, Preventing Youth Offending Project. And we start working with kids at the age of 8. Yeah. And it was really that early intervention stuff where the warning signs were already there, whether they was in education or within the community. So we'd kind of go in and do the intervention there. But the intervention as well wasn't just with a young person. So they'd be referred to us, because they'd be seen as the problem, but we'd go in and do work with the young people, but then we'd also start to do some work as well with the parents, and start to kind of get them to also look at what it was that they were doing and how they could maybe shift their parenting styles that might be able to help as well. So, the younger the better, but I've got a friend of mine at the moment and he was a governor and he's gone back to teaching. And he's working with like years 5 and 6. And he says, Geth, he says, I can look at him in the classroom and think, if something's not done there, we know what's happening, So, so he's exactly right. It needs to be done very early, pre-puberty.
And I think it's obviously we'll definitely get to the amazing work you're doing later on in the podcast. But I think you having them experiences, like the kids are going to relate with you where someone who hasn't been through all your journey or been in your shoes, then they're not obviously less to kind of relate with. Like,
it does make a difference. When I worked in that area, it's funny because this was a few years ago now, and they didn't like you to be able to share your experience with them, but you didn't actually have to, because they just knew that you knew, so they'd come out with some kind of like, when you just look at them and go, really? And they just knew that you knew. It's like you can't kid a kidder, so to speak. And then they go, you've done stuff in the past, and I know you have. I go, and then that was enough.
I mean, you was life behind bars for I think over 8 years. You talked about destroying a lot of relationships along the way. I mean, what was life in prison, in and out, in and out? I mean, that must have been quite tough. Or was it quite hard then getting in the outside world? And that adjusting in some ways, you could say.
So I'm going to quote Morgan Freeman from The Shawshank Redemption. And he says a little quote in there. He says, what happens is when people first go to prison, they fear the walls. Then what happens is they then get used to the walls. And then eventually they end up depending on the walls. And that is exactly the process. So I was in prison when I was 14, 15, 16, 17. I had the year 18 off, because I got 26 grand compensation, so I didn't need to get in trouble. But once the money ran out, I was back on it again. Away when I was 19, when I was 20, when I was 21. And then I was in and out until the age of 34, So I wasn't even a successful criminal, I weren't that great, I got caught a lot, all right? But the first time I went to prison, I was 14 years of age, and that was in 1985. And back in there, it was like called detention centres. And detention centres were brought in as what they called a short, sharp shock. We're going to scare you straight. And I won't even lie, I was absolutely terrified, when I kind of got that sentence. And I was literally a 14-year-old child. And I always say child. So I remember when my own son turned 14, I realised just how young I was. And I also already knew young people that had been in that place, and I knew about the violence, the intimidation and the bullying from both the staff and the other young men. And I can remember driving up to that prison, Send Detention Centre was between Woking and Guildford, and being absolutely terrified, but also knowing I could not show any fear, because I'd already learnt from in the care homes and the children's homes that I had to be able to survive in that place. And that day is kind of imprinted on my head, and I can remember going in there and there was men screaming at me, shouting at me. I was stripped naked. I was given a card, M33681 Jones, sir. And it was just all intimidation, And under every interaction with these men, it was like, if you do not comply, violence with the outcome, And it was all like, double timing here, running there, it was marching. It was all like it was brutal, absolutely brutal. There are some YouTube video clips. If anyone wants to have a kind of a little look at them, detention centres they were called. But I always say, like, I was broken before I went there. I was absolutely broken before I went there, and then like literally they snapped me in half. They snapped me in half. And and when I mean snap me in half, it kind of said to myself, I am never going to trust another living soul. I'm the only person I could depend upon was me, and I was no longer going to play your game. And this is all you've got. Bring it on. Bring it on. Because I ain't playing anymore. I'm just going and just living my life. And that was then what just kind of catapulted me off. And what I mean by that, when I say catapulted me off, it separated me from society. I did not feel like I belonged in society. Everybody outside were different to me. They were normal people. You do what you like. I'm not in your world. I'm just going to be in my world. And then prison sadly became an occupational hazard. Okay. And then very quickly, I'd probably say by the time I was like 16, 17, going to prison was like putting on an old comfy pair of slippers. I kind of knew where I sat. I had like a network of people. I had an identity. I had a reputation. I absolutely knew how the system worked. I could make it used to my advantage. And literally, it just became my life. But as you say, what happened was the change was I wasn't able to cope in the world outside because I couldn't live in your world. Because I didn't know how your world worked because I've never lived in it as an ordinary person, so to speak.
Is it because they obviously take away all them responsibilities of day-to-day life? So when you get back in that real world, there's no one there to kind of put you on that right path or kind of, get that responsibilities back kind of thing.
But and even also, so if we look at looked after children, so I'm a care leaver. If I looked after children, I was institutionalised before I actually went to prison. Because I'd been living in a system for years. And children's homes is exactly the same thing. They do everything for you. Everything is done through sort of like case conferences, files. They're telling you where you're going, what you're going to do, and everything like that. So the prison just was like a bigger children's home. And if you kind of look at how that happens is if you give nobody responsibility, you get what's called a learned helplessness. So actually, even though you don't like it, you become dependent on it because you don't know how to do anything yourself. And then over a period of time, you become institutionalized. And then that's kind of where the problem comes from because you don't know how to live in the world outside. You get trapped by the safety and security of what you know. So if I'll give you an example, say as proper parenting, so I've done a lot of parenting stuff. I've worked in all of them services as well. If you think of a mum and dad, when a child is first born, that child is completely dependent on whether that child lives or dies. Over a period of time, as that child's growing up, it's a process of letting go. So you give that child more and more responsibility, and let them make their own choices and decisions until hopefully by the time they get to 17, 18, 19, they're ready to move on with the rest of their lives. If you're in children's homes, that experience doesn't happen. And then if you go to prison, it definitely doesn't happen. And then what happens is you're putting these people in the world that are ill-equipped without the basic skills and abilities to be able to survive.
When you was in prison, was there any kind of training or kind of education there for you to try and help you on the outside, or was that not really put into place, or it just wasn't good enough? Like,
I suppose back in the days when I was there, it just
yeah,
wasn't good enough. Yes, they didn't really have many of the programs. You had some places like Grendon where they had therapeutic communities, but they were only for the very, very serious offenders. Yeah, so
yeah,
people like myself, which were just pain in the criminal justice's backside. Yeah, there wasn't a lot kind of going for us. But what they would do is you'd be able to go to kind of like education and maybe like get a basic maths course or a basic English course. Yeah. You used to also be able to do maybe a basic city and guilds in bricklaying or welding or
yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah. So, but the truth of the matter is those kind of qualifications weren't worth nothing. Yeah. When you
yeah,
kind of went out, if you took that to like a welding company and say, I've got this basic welding course, yeah, they just look at you and think, what?
yeah.
You know,
I don't
it
know what it
take
is.
you 12 weeks to get it. You know, it
Yeah,
meant nothing. Yeah. So yeah. So really, they were tokenistic.
yeah,
You know, there is more within the system now. But then the trouble with the system at the moment is there's not enough staffing to facilitate it. Yeah, so we got a real issue with staffing at the moment, which means actually they do have more programs, they do have more education, they do have more therapeutic work, but because they don't have enough prison officers to run the regime, people
yeah.
are still just locked up, stuck behind a door, doing nothing.
What do you mean by therapeutic work? Can we talk a bit about that? And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, so if I just explain as well, so I don't know if I've mentioned it on here, but I was also a dependent heroin user. Yeah, so I used to stick needles in my neck. Yeah.
yeah,
And I can remember on my last sentence when I was doing 4 years, it was on the old rule. Yeah, so you used to have to do 2/3 of that. So it was 2 years, 8 months. And what happened was, I kind of thought to myself, well, I need to change something, yeah, because because this ain't working too well for me, yeah. Because people used to say to me, you need to change. I'll be like, no shit, Sherlock, I'll stick needles in my neck, yeah. Then what happened was I found out they had this drug treatment program, yeah. So in my head, like I thought to myself, right, if I go onto that course, yeah, and get a handle on the gear, when I get out, I can just sell it and not use it. Yeah,
yeah,
so I only went on the course so I could be a successful criminal. And I also thought to myself, I might also be able to get a bit of parole as well so I can get out
yeah,
early. Little did I realise was what therapeutic meant.
yeah.
Yeah, so what they did very quickly was got into my head, yeah, and started to make me realise that my life wasn't quite normal, yeah, and because people
How
used
did
to say
that make
that,
you
but
feel? Was that quite scary going back to them kind of memories and your upbringing? Was it quite traumatic in some ways, bringing them emotions back up?
yeah, yes. Well, first of all, I had to shatter my denial is the only thing to do to explain it. Yeah. So what
Yeah,
it was, when I went in there, people used to say to me, "Why did you take drugs?" I go, "Well, just like them, don't I?
yeah,
Just like them." Yeah. And they go, "No, there's always a reason why." And I used to go like, "Yeah, you think that I was abused or something like that? Oh, yeah, my
yeah,
life is all right." Yeah. So I literally thought, and this is God's honest truth, I thought my life was normal. Yeah, I thought it was completely normal. Yeah, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. Yeah,
yeah.
but that was because I was brought up as I was brought up, and other people were brought up in the same way. So
Yeah.
for me, I didn't know
I
any
was going to say
different.
you never saw any different. Like, say, if you're like product of the environment, if you've been in care homes your whole life, that's your life. So obviously, you don't know how
Yeah,
other kids have been brought up.
and and then the mad thing, but when I started to realise it wasn't quite right, was because I kind of like they'd asked me to kind of share bits of my story, and I share my life, and like people couldn't even feed back because they were just like,
Shots.
yeah, and I'm like, oh, this don't seem a bit right,
Yeah,
you know. And so then what happened was, so on that treatment centre, on that sentence, sorry, I'd done 3 different programs on that sentence, but that was because it was too painful. So what happened is I'd go on there, I'd kind of start to dig a little bit deeper. It become so painful that I'd sabotage it and then
mm,
go back onto like normal regime. But then there was something that kind of gripped inside me that was saying, I need to sort this out. I have to sort this out. I realised now there was a bigger problem. So then I'd go in. It was like literally, it was like getting in a boxing ring.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd go in and
Get
kind of
beaten
have
up.
another bout with it.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then they'd beat me to bits. Yeah. And
yeah,
then I'm like, whoa, I'm done. Yeah. I'm going back on the normal regime. And,
yeah,
and I've done that a third time, you know. So, Yeah, so and then I did it when I came out as well. So in total, I've done 8 different rehabs. Yeah, 8 rehabs. Yeah, I've done more therapy. You know what to do with. But it was kind of like as if I had to do it layer by layer by layer by layer by layer because there was just so much of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like every time it was literally going in for like an emotional, spiritual, and mental punch up with Muhammad Ali.
Would you say you're quite spiritual in some ways?
Yeah. But I think I've always been spiritual. Yeah, I think I've always kind of had that. I've always kind of known somewhere that something was looking after me. Yeah. So when I said about that compensation, you just like think, oh my God, this fella, what's going on? So when I was 5 years of age, I got run over by a double-decker bus. Yeah, like literally, I got run over by a double-decker bus. I broke both my legs. Fractured my pelvis, one of my arms, got scars on my body like you would not believe, and like literally they said I wasn't going to make it through the night, and it was right outside of this church called St. Michael's Church, and I remember being told this church prayed for me all night, and I got through, and I'm still here today. And then when I look at my drug use and my lifestyle, I should have died many times, and I used to kind of know that something was there, but I didn't know what it was. And today I'm not religious, but I am very spiritual, and I probably link more to Buddhism, and I do like investigate and practice a bit of Buddhism as well. And that for me is kind of like, I believe the universe looks after me for some kind of reason, which is probably why I do the stuff that I do today.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. When even when I had Mickey Darks, he talks about being spiritual, and he had a very similar kind of experience with you. So yeah, it's quite interesting how that kind of reflection and kind of looking back can kind of take you on a new path in life. When did you reconnect with your brother then? Obviously, you got taken away. Was you in prison when you reconnected with your brother?
No, so my brother got out of children's homes just before me. So I actually, this is another story I've got. Actually. So what happened? I was like, I was in children's homes at 15, and then me and Mike, we ended up getting in trouble again. We was 15 years of age, and usually we just get remanded to the care of the local authority. Anyway, social services stood up and said, there's nothing more we can do for him. So rather than get remanded to the care of the local authority, we got remanded to Winchester Prison when we were 15 years of age. So that was the first time I went to Winchester, which then became my home until the age of 34 the last time I went in there. But then what happened was, because I was so young, I was only 15, they had to literally give me a sentence to take me to my 16th birthday, because I couldn't live independently. So they kept me in prison until I turned 16. And then a few months after my 16th birthday, then kicked me out and put me back into a city I hadn't been to for years. But my brother had been out of care a little while before that, so I reconnected with my brother. And it was funny because they separated me and my brother because they thought I might take him down the wrong path. Literally within 6 months, I got him his first prison sentence.
Jesus.
So they were right.
But
that was a funny story as well, though, because like we got into some bother, and it was touch and go whether I could get away with it. And then he said, "Look, Giff, I'll just take the charge, say it was me." He goes, "'Cause I ain't been in trouble before." I went, "Oh, brilliant, Dave. Cheers, mate." So anyway, so he took the charge, thinking he'd just like get like a community order, and then they locked him up.
Jesus.
But then the funny thing was, he said when he went to Winchester, he said, "I loved it when I got to Winchester though, because everybody knew that he was my brother, so he was looked after there. He felt like he was a bit of a king in there."
I mean, when you go to prison, like, how do you build them kind of? Obviously, you want to stay out of trouble, but obviously you want to, number one, stick up for yourself and not try and take any shit. I remember reading a book about it was a famous professional golfer. And he went to prison, and to get by, he taught the prisoners how to play golf. So he had this like skill set. Do you need something about you to get by, to get on the right side of the prisoners? Because you don't want to be, that person getting in trouble all the time, mate.
So I suppose what it's been for me, there's a couple of things, So I'm not naturally a violent person. That's not who I am, But I'm very charismatic, as you can probably say, And I'm very good with people, So I had this thing of like where the most dangerous people were quite attracted to me, So I'd have them around me, which kind of helps, Okay, because people are like, fucking, once you forget if he's a bit nuts, look at who he's going around with. So I kind of play on that a little bit, okay. But then what happened was a couple of times I had this happen in the children's homes, and I also happened it when I was in prison. there was times, where actually something had happened, and there was going to be a violent incident, it could not be avoided, and the only way I can explain that, was inside of me was absolute fear, absolute fear, because I'm not naturally a violent person, but I also know as well I have to defend, and I think what happened was that fear was so powerful that on both of them occasions, I succeeded very easily, but actually what I will say, it was the fear then they did, because they came at me thinking this is an easy take, whereas I was fighting for my life, but they didn't know that, and it was that kind of protected me. And then I was also quite good at like working the system. So there was another time when I was in jail, and there was a bloke, that had grasped on me, and you get like what's called depositions, so everybody had seen these statements, they knew it great grasped. So they was like, "You've got to do something, Gethin." This is all I need, Right. So what I did, right, I was out, I got like a toothbrush, I mounted 2 razors onto this toothbrush, right, and his surname was Knight. I remember like opening up his flat, and just going through the flat, I said, "When you come out on association later, I'm going to open you up, I'm going to cut you up, So what I was doing was I was filling in with fear. I'm going to cut you up like that, and then shut the flat, So then what's happened is I've then gone down for association, and they're going, "You going to have him, Geff?" And I'm going, yeah. And like, I've got the blade on me. So it's that thing now of like, if he comes down, I've got to do it. All of a sudden, the prison officer's shouted out, "Jones, come here." So I give the blade to the fellow that was next to me. I walked out there and they've gone, "What have you done tonight?" He's putting himself on protection and says that you're going to cut him. I said, "Yeah, if he comes down here, I'll do him rotten." And then what's happened is I've then got my credibility with everybody around me, but I've also avoided. So I think I was just quite good at being able to survive and do what I needed to do.
Yeah, I think you need that as well. I can imagine if you're in this situation, like, you've got to stand up for yourself and maybe put on a I don't know what the word is, like put on this kind of like persona to get you through that kind of time. I mean, by the end of it, I imagine everybody knew you anyway, so you wouldn't have to keep putting on this whole persona every time you went in. Like.
No, and the thing is them situations I'm talking about there were in the youth estate. So that was in the young, so that was when you used to be locked up until the age of 21. It was in the youth estate. With the youth estate, with anything, it's a lot of people just jostling for status, where you fit. So there's a lot more violence in the young person's prison estate than what there is in the adults. By the time you got to adults, things are a little bit more settled, But if you do get violence, it's usually quite extreme, but it's not as regular, And exactly that same thing. I was so used to being in the system, and so many people knew me in the system. By that point, I didn't have to do that anymore, So life then just became very easy because people knew who I was. I knew who other people were. We knew where we kind of fitted, and it just kind of worked.
Yeah. And what was that turning point for you? Was it the relationships you had in the prison where you met a counsellor? Would you say that was like your turning point in your life to some degree?
Yeah, so I suppose really that there has to be sort of like the hook first, So when I was in the treatment program, and people used to say to me I used to need to change, but I didn't know what I needed to change into. People always take the word rehabilitation. But rehabilitate means you make something what it once was. What if it never was? What are you rehabilitating that to? Yeah. So I never really had a vision of where it was I needed to go. So what happened was when I was on that first treatment program, they said, "Geff, we need you to come and listen to this fella speak." And I remember walking in and looking at this bloke and thinking, "What do you know about me, mate? What do you know about my life?" And then he started to share his story. And when he shared his story, I identified with his story. And then he talked about his new life, and he talked about he had a flat, he had a family, he had a job, he went on holidays, he had a passport, he had a bank account, he had all this normal stuff. I remember my jaw hitting the floor. I didn't think that stuff was possible for people like me. So I call that hope, and hope stands for me. And I've got a program which I'm named after another gentleman that had the same experience, a bloke called Jamie, who's an IPP prisoner. And hope stands for hearing other people's experiences. That's what hope is. And that's where I first saw the vision. So it was then that pushed me on to other areas. So I then went down to Earl Stoke prison, and I met a gentleman called Harry, and Harry was an prisoner from America, and also was an intravenous dependent heroin user as well. And he developed a human-to-human relationship with me within that prison, where I was able to start to develop some trust with him that and then enabled me to look deeper at myself. But also as well, because I was on a little bit of a therapeutic community, there was just 16 of us on there. I also had a prison officer called Stuart Degville, who was you called them back in them days personal officers. And I started to develop a relationship with him as well. And then those two relationships were kind of supported and helped me to kind of move to the next step in more kind of change, if you want to call it that.
Have you still got relationships with Stuart and the staff? Like?
No, so Stuart sadly left the prison system. So I've met one of his colleagues down at Old Stoke Prison, a bloke called Nick. And Nick sort of like heard about all the stuff that I've been doing. I've also been down to Old Stoke Prison. And he's just like, my God, you know, because he kind of remembers you from there. But Stuart retired and he kind of went off in another kind of world. But I do have a belief that at some stage, I'll bump into him for one reason or another. It will kind of happen because the universe has that sort of stuff. That's how it kind of works. But Harry, I met Harry, it must have been about 12 years ago now. I was down in Bristol and there was this bit of a convention going on in celebrating recovery. And I just heard this big American accent and I thought, Harry. And what it was then when Harry was leaving, when I was there as well, we got like a group picture. I still got the group photo as well with Harry too. And I wrote a poem. Yeah, and we had this picture put on it, and he goes, I've still got your poem framed and it's on the wall as well. So, that was magical. That sort of stuff's magical.
That's amazing. I mean, from your experience, obviously being in and out of prison, what do you think the main thing, what needs to change in regards to kind of the justice system?
So the main thing that needs to change, is the public. It's the public, So the public needs to realise and understand what the true purpose of prison is. So a lot of people at the moment, they're still of that mindset that prison's primary purpose is to punish people, to punish people. But actually, the punishment is the loss of liberty. That's the punishment, So if we think about when we was at COVID, and we all kind of got locked in, we all understood what it was like to lose your liberty and being separated from your family, your friends, and your support network. We all understand what that sounds like now. Feels like now. That's the punishment. So prison's primary purpose should be about therapy, education, rehabilitation, and support to help people change and live better kind of lives. At the moment, we're failing in that. We're failing. So what happens is the justice system will say we put people in prison to keep communities safe. But what I say is actually prisons now are making communities more unsafe. Because less than 1% of the prison population is never getting out. They're all getting out at some point. So if we're not giving them the therapeutic support, we're not giving them the education, the rehabilitation and opportunities when they leave prison, then actually they're coming back to your communities and your communities are going to become more unsafe because reoffending rates are just rising every single year. Building more prisons is not the answer.
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching a documentary last night. It's on BBC iPlayer, Detectives OCJ, and it talks about the, I think not Halifax. I'm trying to think now. Rochdale, about the gangs in Rochdale, and it was saying in regards to obviously like the criminal rates of theft and everything is just off the scales at the minute, and violence and kind of thing, and it's this kind of like 360. And even whenever I'd other guests on the podcast who've been in prison, I feel like they're in and then they're back out, they're in and they're back out kind of thing. So there's no kind of support in there to kind of stop them wanting to go back in. Like,
right. But then also as well, there's another issue as well. So you've got that bit, which is the situations now, But then you've got to look upstream, So imagine it, people are falling in a river, And then what the justice system is trying to do is pull them out of the river, But what it is you want to have a look at where they're falling in the river, And the falling in the river is the early interventions, Paul, So if you think about it, we know all of the postcodes that feed our prison. And I use London as an example. They're the places, they're coming from sort of like Hackney, do you know what I mean? They're coming from like Brixton, they're coming from all of them real areas of deprivation, where there's high levels of drug use, gang use and everything else like that, okay? What we also know as well is 80% of young men in prison, 80% come from fatherless families, So there's no father involved, So what it is you've got no father, you've got instability at home. Because of the instability at home, guess what we're doing then? We're kicking them out of school because they're not achieving in school and reaching the HC grades, blah, 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 the curriculum. So then what happens is they're then going out onto the communities and in the streets, and everyone feels they need to belong. We all want to belong somewhere, So that's when gangs look attractive, because there's the belonging there, Somebody feels attached and they're going to belong to something. And then also as well, what they're seeing is all of these ones in the gangs are the only ones that are driving around in nice cars, got money, clothes and all of that sort of stuff. So we got a societal issue that's going on here as well, So we need to change the purpose of what prison is, but we also need to do the early intervention support up here in relation to stopping people coming into the system,
Yeah. And I mean, and it's incredible, obviously, the work you're doing now with unlocking potential. I mean, how long have you been doing that? And did that obviously came out from your experience and wanting to change?
Yeah, so so I'll just explain. So I turned my life around in 2006. At that point in my life, I had 56 offences, 18 convictions, 8 years behind a prison wall. I had no qualifications. I was been an intravenous dependent heroin user. It weren't a great looking CV, and nobody was queuing up to give me a job. All right.
Yeah.
But within a 7-year period, I went from 2 hours a week volunteering to 7 years later being a service manager within Portsmouth City Council and Public Health, overseeing a staff team of 40 years to reduce health inequalities to the most deprived area of the city I grew up within. I was also holding a £1.5 million a year budget, to manage that service. Okay. What I did when I was during that time was I really kind of understood myself as an individual, a person, where my skill sets was in relation to not just helping people that are trapped within the system, but also training and developing staff so they can better engage with those people that they sometimes deem as hard to reach. I struggle with the word hard to reach because actually we sometimes make it harder for them to reach us because of systems, processes, bureaucracy, and all of that sort of stuff. So kind of what happened was about 6 years ago, even though I had this really good, well-paid job, I just felt there's something more I could do. I wanted to do something more. So that was when I set up.
Unfulfilled in some ways, because obviously money helps a degree, and I imagine it's amazing. Obviously, like you're in this high-rolling job now, you're overlooking a massive team over 150. Money's there, and you can afford to do whatever you want, but it just wasn't enough. Or was it always that kind of like in a thought in the back of your head?
No, it wasn't enough. So what it was, I just felt everything I was doing was a token gesture. So actually, I had a good lifestyle. I was doing all right. My job was quite easy because, but I didn't feel like I was actually having a real benefit on the people that needed the help and support. It's very tokenistic. So that's why I felt there was more that I needed to do. I also as well lost my brother. He was only in his early 40s to lung cancer. And not long after that, I also lost my best friend that sort of like went back into the drug world. And before that, I'd already lost Mike. And he took his life in Winchester prison. So I just kind of, I had all of this sort of stuff that there, when you have all these sort of things happen, it makes you kind of ask questions about yourself, your purpose and all that sort of stuff. So I just knew that I wanted to do something more. And then I also realised about that point, during that point through conversations, that sort of like, prison staff were becoming very, very disillusioned, because they felt nobody was changing. And the reason for that is because they didn't see their successes because they don't come back through the gate, Okay. So that was where it kind of started. The journey started with me going into prisons and doing presentations to prison staff through all staff briefs, and then starting to do some training with prison officers about what I call the seeds of belief, about how they can be the person that sows the belief to support change that can help somebody move forward in the future. And then that kind of adapted, and then I started to create some training programs called The Art of Communication, which was about how to build their relationships. And then I started to deliver personal responsibility and change programs to the prisoners. And that was about also getting them to learn how to trust a system they fundamentally mistrusted. And then that just kind of grew, So I do consultation work as a lived experience consultant about how to create a system that's fit for purpose and fairest for all. I've recently just come back from Australia, working in the prison in Australia and doing some stuff with their community corrections. And in February, I'm off to work in 3 different prisons in America, one in Florida, one in Texas, and one in Arizona,
Amazing.
So, and like 6 years ago, just take this quickly, 6 years ago, my first customer was 200 meters away from my house. Yeah. 6 years later, they're flying me around the other side of the world to do it.
That's amazing. I mean, what is the difference then between kind of the US prison and the UK prison? Is it or Australia prison, for example? Is there a massive difference when you find that you go to these different countries and you kind of see how their prisons are run in comparison to the UK?
Yeah. So, like you say, so I haven't been in the American prisons, done consultancy work, so I'd have to kind of give you an update on that one before. But yeah, you may be a bit shocked by this, but Australian prisons are probably about 20 years behind where we are. Yeah,
Wow.
they're about, yeah. Back in the UK, back in the 80s, 90s, early 90s, there used to be a saying by prison officers, and it was like, give them fuck all and plenty of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's pretty much what it's like in Australia. They're all crims and they're no good and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So the thing is, at the moment, there's very little lived experience within the Australian system. That's something that I'm trying to kind of push and kind of breed over there. But also as well, you know, is the they've got the staffing levels to run regimes, but they don't have the right programs to be able to help people to sage and move forward. So yeah, there's a bit of work to do over there.
Yeah. And you think the main thing in the UK you've kind of spoke about is we need more kind of staff, and obviously the training is just not there in terms of like building these kind of relationships with the prisoners.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be able to be done. So I'm really kind of like looking at sort of more of the consultation work in relation to the prison system at the moment. Yeah. So I always quote and I can't even remember his name now, but he was one of the most intelligent men in the world. And what he said was like the definition of insanity, Einstein it was, Einstein. He said the definition of an insanity is to keep doing exactly the same thing, expecting a different result. Yeah. Okay. The justice system has been doing that for so long. We keep on doing the wrong thing for the right reason. And the reason we're doing the wrong thing is because we're not speaking to the right people. We don't truly understand the problem. Once we start to speak to the right people and truly understand the problem, then we can create the right solution that's going to help maybe shift and change the system so it to become a better kind of place. So there's a lot of complexities involved in that. And I just kind of want to be part of the conversation within it, you know. But I do believe, say, like with prison staff, just as an example, a prison officer, start to finish, is 12-week training. 12 weeks of training when you're thinking about the complexities of what living there. For me, I believe a prison officer should be trained in a social work model. Because you're still socially working with people and they need to understand more about what's happened to people, their life and everything like that, and how to be able to better engage with them.
Yeah. And what's next for unlocking potential? Obviously, you've kind of spoken there, you're flying out to America and Australia. I mean, you must have some like grand plans. I saw that you do quite a few different courses as well, aimed at kind of the prisons as well.
So I've got a few different plans. There's always a plan. So I'm going to continue with the consultancy work in relation to that. A lot of the programs that I'm doing, I'm going to start to license them. So people buy them as licenses. Because next year I'm kind of calling it my farewell tour. So next year will be my last year of going and delivering stuff within prisons. And the reason for that is on the 23rd of January, it would have been 39 years ago that I first went into a prison. Wow. So I've been going in one way or another for 39 years. I feel like I've done more time.
You've done your bit now,
Done my bit, So on the 23rd of January 2025, that'll be 40 years and that'll be me done. So I'm just doing that side of it. But everything I do is what I call human-to-human relationships, and also human-to-human leadership. So next year, I plan to create in personal development programs that are going to be done through e-learning. But I'll also be looking at doing like workshops, keynotes and other sorts of stuff like that. And what I say to people is we all get trapped or stuck sometimes in life. If I can turn people's lives around from them backgrounds, imagine what I could do for you.